You are listening to 600 Saga. Today's feature is A Life of Toil or Leisure by Tris Matthews. Something or nothing? Paul looked away from his friend, away from the lake, across the park to where black-faced glass buildings peeped, their grass-topped heads over the treetops. Not sure yet. That's a nothing's answer, Jude said. Maybe. Hot sunshine, the perfect winter morning, but the two boys knew they wouldn't be spending many more idle days like this. Tomorrow, they'd submit their decisions, and it was obvious Jude would be a something. Jude swiped at the water, shimmering droplets patterned in a half-moon, catching the swan's hungry attention. Then he jumped to his feet. Let's walk. I want to show you something. Something and nothing. A stupid way to refer to the two life choices. Biased slang used by the somethings. Paul hated it, as Jude knew. The official terms were inventor and leisurite. Leisurites, of course, had their own biased slang. Analysts and experimentalists. Though Paul hadn't worked out why this was derogatory toward the analysts. Jude headed them under the thick canopy of oaks and beeches. The boys had to lift their knees high to wade through the dew-drenched undergrowth. See those? Jude pointed to the nearest stream in the network that fed the park. Dad told me about them. Both of Jude's parents were inventors. Back in the 70s, Hyde Park had a fleet of maintenance bots, keeping it watered so it didn't dry up again, like in the 50s. But then a something devised this fully sustainable watering network. It's practical and aesthetic. Best of both worlds. A young couple came wading down the stream, shoes in hand, pants rolled high above their knees. She was dark-skinned, perhaps of Indian ancestry, while he had butter-blonde hair and tanned skin. She waved at the boys, unfolding a wide, soft smile. Paul guessed they were leisurites. I know. The inventors are responsible for all things that make modern life so wonderful. Jude stopped battling with the undergrowth. That's not my point. What I mean is, even if you choose to be a something, you can still work in the parks and forests. You lose nothing by being a something. The nothings just look at the world. As a something, you actually shape it. Paul leapt over a bramble and plowed past his friend, raising his voice a little but not turning back. Leisurites don't just look. It's like all the time you and I have spent here, we explore, relax, play. My dad says it's silly to waste your life redesigning the world without ever experiencing it. Your dad's a leisurite. Of course he'd say that. They battled through the nature a little further, then seated onto the beaten path that accompanied the stream to the city. Hyde Park ended and the city began at Marble Arch, but the trees and stream continued down Oxford Street. Though banked by a more classically civilized lawn, people sauntered and loitered in leisurely clusters. The canopy was thinner here, so dappled natural sunlight danced across the ground, kissing the year-round decorative flowers and emphasizing their colors like Christmas lights. Low fruit trees stood every few meters. Paul jumped up for 2 red apples and tossed one to Jude, who grinned and attacked it loudly. Genetically engineered by somethings, Jude sprayed. And sweetly appreciated by empiricists, Paul laughed back. Jude threw a lazy arm around his childhood buddy as they walked. He waved his apple at the various service store fronts dotted between restaurants and drinking establishments, reading off their names. Browsing bar, 3D lounge, the arts factory, AI buddies, cook for fun. All these services were created by somethings, inventors if you prefer. That's what I want you to think about. If you choose to be a leisurite, sure, you can visit these places. You can go to any country via immersive reality, or have afternoon tea and conversation with a robot, but none of it really engages your brain. Information is everywhere, but you'll be an audience member rather than an actor in your own life. That isn't how it is, Jude. Leisurites spend their time doing whatever takes their fancy. Chatting, reading, immersive reality. My parents have amazing lives. It seems silly to choose a lifetime of study when everybody, leisurite or inventor, gets the same resource allowance. Jude shook his head. Forget resource allowance. Nothings are never first. They just partake in the activities some things invent for them. What's the point in life if you're not expanding human knowledge? Leisurites spend their whole lives expanding their own knowledge. They experience so much more than any single analyst. Paul slipped into the derogatory term without thinking. They live full lives without narrow blinkers. A cheery litterbot approached, requesting their apple cores, wished them a happy day, and sauntered off through the loose crowd. Besides, Paul continued, everybody knows that even the inventors don't really do anything. Bots invent everything we need. The only reason inventor is a life choice is to satisfy those who prefer studying. Isn't it worse that you can't even get satisfaction from experiencing what life has to offer? Jude's face darkened. Paul knew Jude wanted him to become an inventor so they could always be friends, always have something in common. If they chose different paths, they would drift apart. It always happened. Next day, Jude went first. He stepped out of the teacher's office and gave Paul an authoritative nod. But Paul still hadn't made up his mind, even as he entered. The principal bot sat behind its desk. Inventor or leisurite? It asked without looking up from its tablet. Paul hesitated, waiting for a word to bubble up from his belly, waiting for a choice to make itself. He heard himself mutter something, but even as he said it, he couldn't believe it. The bot started to tap on its tablet. Did I choose inventor? Paul mumbled, though far too quietly. He wouldn't take it back. He was going to make something of his life. Sorry? The principal asked. Paul shook his head and said, Nothing. This was A Life of Toil or Leisure by Tris Matthews. Tris Matthews is a London boy in an achy man's body who lives in a rapidly developing borough. A natural pessimist, he takes deliberate pleasure in forcing himself to imagine how the future could be bright. He has had a career that skirts around both wordy, artsy stuff and formal science, and is now happily working for a science publishing company. He also loves to read and write sci-fi. Find him at trismatthews.com or on Twitter at Tori_Tris. Check our show notes for links. Music is provided by Mads. Learn more about 600 Second Saga, our authors, how to submit your flash fiction, and how to support the podcast in the show notes. This has been Mariah Avix and 600 Second Saga.